There is a major problem in the UFO community, as most of you well know. In order to fix it, members must find solidarity despite their differences and standardize the approach to the topic in a way that works for everyone in the community. If proponents of ufology are to have any hope of being taken seriously by skeptics or the general public, some changes are in order. This episode of the program will outline methods to help jumpstart this process. Welcome back to UAP as NHI, Probability versus Certainty. The opening theme is Restore and the artist is Donbor. I'm your host, Bill Sego, and today's episode is The 10 Rules of Engagement in Ufology. Be sure to visit uapasnhi.com to check out the member forum and join in the discussion. In this week's episode, I will present a 10-step approach to the topic that aims to eliminate most of the discord within the UFO community. Anyone who harbors interest in the topic intrinsically clings to their own ideas or beliefs regarding the phenomenon. I'm no exception and am equally guilty of allowing my own personal convictions to sometimes get in the way of an unbiased interpretation. While that is perfectly natural, I'm going to present methods for how to avoid this trap and reasons for why our differences need not fracture the community. I will highlight why everyone who takes the topic seriously has at least something valuable to contribute. By embracing our differences and considering what each of us has to offer, there is a way to work together in order to tackle the UAP mystery without discounting or clinging to any single interpretation. Another positive that can come out of following these basic rules is that they will help the community avoid making logical fallacies or errors in the structure of an argument. It will also better prepare you for a public interview or discussion, especially if those asking the questions are overly skeptical, susceptible to the giggle factor, or prone to putting you on the defensive regarding your own ideas or interpretation of said evidence. It must be noted that I'm not an authority on how anyone should conduct themselves with regard to approaching the topic of UAP. I'm simply trying to contribute in any way I can by finding common ground so that we can bring about the necessary changes and all work together. Most everyone in the community is doing their part in their own unique way. Some conduct interviews with eyewitnesses or other ufologists, others make documentaries or compile videos for the world to view, and yet others focus on researching specific cases that pique their interest. Even those with a mere interest in the topic who talk about it with their family, peers, or coworkers are doing their part to spread awareness. We all contribute something unique in the quest for answers, and we each offer a different perspective on the topic. This is a strength that should be embraced and encouraged, not something that should divide us merely because we view the phenomenon differently. Rule number 1. Avoid convictions. The use of the term belief is misleading when referring to the UAP phenomenon and may send the wrong message. That word should be omitted from the vernacular of this topic altogether. To believe is to accept something as absolute truth based on a mere opinion or what someone thinks is true. If members of the community can avoid being branded as a believer and instead embrace the more appropriate title of proponent, then this will greatly assist in avoiding some of the stigma associated with the topic. Consideration of the phenomenon's validity isn't a matter of belief either for or against a non-human interpretation of the evidence. It's a matter of possibility or probability, not a question of someone's personal conviction. At present, all we can deduce is that it is probable, possible, or improbable for some type of NHI involvement based on a critical analysis of the available evidence. That applies to any individual case as well as the overall culmination of evidence pulled from all the best cases throughout history. The UFO community should consistently refrain from indicating whether or not they believe a particular case is valid, and instead address it in terms of probability. Of course, everyone is entitled to have an actual opinion as to how they interpret the evidence, and all of us will occasionally slip up and use language that is a natural part of our vocabulary. But we should at least work at it, and remember that providing opinions regarding this topic should be reserved for private discussions among peers or colleagues. Personal opinions shared with the public, on the other hand, merely muddy the waters. They are absolutely the root of all the discord and infighting within the UFO community. Scientists and skeptics should also embrace this rule, as they are just as guilty of expressing their beliefs or opinions regarding what they think about the topic. You see it time and again during public interviews. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michael Shermer, Mick West, and many others are all guilty of this, yet they are supposed to be the ones immune to belief or personal opinion when it comes to dealing with questions about the nature of reality. Even Richard Dawkins, a staunch opponent to the idea of ETH, is guilty of using the term belief when it comes to how he interprets ideas in evolution, as was the case in a recent interview with Michael Shermer. But if the UFO community is at least able to refrain from expressing their opinions going forward, then perhaps the skeptical community might feel compelled to follow suit and similarly discard their own personal views in opposition to the topic. At the very least, it will allow the UFO community to take the high road and rise above such scrutiny, whether skeptics reciprocate or not. The fact remains that there is presently no concrete evidence in support of a non-human origin interpretation of UAP. The probability of this interpretation, on the other hand, can be calculated both on a case-by-case basis and by looking at the phenomenon as a whole when critically reviewing the overall culmination of the best available evidence. Later episodes will outline these methods in more detail. If someone asks if you believe in UFOs or think non-human entities are among us, your immediate response should be, no, but I am a proponent, or no, I am a skeptic. A follow-up answer could include something like, it appears the evidence points to such and such, or the available evidence suggests this or that level of probability. Another response could be, no, but the overwhelming amount of credible evidence suggests or points to the notion that there is a high level of probability for the existence of non-human intelligence in our presence. Answers that begin with I believe or I think should be avoided at all cost and stricken from our vocabulary. Anyone can harbor a useless opinion regarding what he or she thinks is going on. It doesn't matter what you, I, or anyone else thinks about a particular case or the phenomenon in general. That is purely inconsequential. Being a proponent of the topic is different from being a believer. If more people would take control of the narrative and instead answer that they are a proponent when asked if they believe in UFOs or aliens, it might help alleviate some of the stigma. Simply state the facts or story behind a particular case and suggest what the evidence points to regarding its probability or lack thereof. This field will be better served without a myriad of personal opinions claiming absolute certainty. Different interpretations are fine. Claiming any one of those as gospel is not. This is the root of all discord within the UFO community and why the study is unable to move forward with any kind of consensus. At the same time, we should have sympathy for those who jump the gun with an opinion, with or without supporting evidence for it. We don't have to be overly critical of someone who clings to a position of belief. Simply make light of it and suggest a method of presenting the case with less opinion and more probability. We are all guilty of having an opinion or bias. It's inescapable. We're only human. But we can at least condition ourselves to avoid expressing them publicly and work at it. This will allow for open dialogue and will promote the topic in a more favorable light. While we might interpret the phenomenon in our own unique way, we all foster the same agenda. Remember, An interpretation of the evidence is not necessarily a belief in it. Those are two entirely different positions. At the same time, regardless of what any of the truth-seeking methods might deduce, that does not need to change your own personal beliefs. It simply allows you to remain open to the other possibilities, something all of us should embrace. Again, treating any considerable amount of evidence as a probability rather than an absolute truth is the key to moving the field of ufology forward. None of us truly have any concrete answers with regard to the phenomenon, so it's high time we get off our high horse, leave the various interpretations on the table, and get to work together. Rule number 2, suspend judgment. Before dismissing or accepting an account at face value, one should first allow any evidence or testimony to go through the motions. If a whistleblower comes forward with a claim, our first reaction shouldn't be, she's a liar, or he's a disinformation agent, or what they're saying must be true. Instead, we should be willing to let the evidence or testimony play out until we have enough information to evaluate responsibly, without making snap judgments. This rule also applies to video footage and purported physical evidence that has yet to be fully or properly analyzed. Two fairly recent examples include the testimony of David Grush and preliminary assessments of what is commonly known as the Nazca mummies. It doesn't matter how you feel about either account. We simply have incomplete information for either at this time. There are those who initially accused David Grush of lying, only to later amend that position. There are also those who claim the mummies must be fake prior to any forensic examination because of their association with Jaime Maussan. As more evidence is analyzed and presented by experts in the various fields, we should feel compelled to then look at it more closely rather than just dismissing it offhand from the start. Either way, both examples have yet to be fully vetted. Withholding judgment is the more responsible approach. It avoids criticism, appearing incorrect when more evidence comes to light, and helps propel the conversation forward without looking hasty. It's conceivable that some of the best evidence regarding a particular case may, in the future, turn out to be incorrect or a hoax, while some of the seemingly lacking or stranger evidence may turn out to have no other credible explanation. One must play the long game. The skeptic has the luxury of making snap judgments since there is no concrete proof in support of the phenomenon. The UFO community, on the other hand, does not, so must be patient and refrain from such pronouncements. Somebody out there is listening and taking notes from people who jump to conclusions for or against a specific case or eyewitness. People are actively collecting any matter-of-fact claims made by both skeptic and proponent for a day when more evidence comes to light. These people are likely compiling memes to splash all over the internet, so it might be more prudent to take the high road, examine the available evidence for what it presently provides, and refrain from becoming judge, jury, and executioner. Rule number 3, abstain from ridicule or personal attacks. Anyone who provides eyewitness testimony for any anomalous account should neither be judged nor ridiculed, regardless of how outlandish or ridiculous the report might appear to you. Even if there is clear evidence of a hoax or deception, simply present that supporting evidence to the general public in a straightforward manner, provide reasons why the account is likely improbable, and move on to the next case. People are going to lie and fabricate, and some are just plain delusional. However, that does not give us the right to go on the attack. Not only does this avoid hurting someone who could be telling the truth as they believe it to be, but it also avoids making you look like a jerk. The same applies to peers in the community who might harbor a different interpretation of the phenomenon. It's okay to disagree with someone, but it's not okay to publicly disparage or attack them. This accomplishes nothing. Attacking someone, for instance a whistleblower who comes forward with an extraordinary claim, and disparaging them before their testimony has a chance to be fully vetted, could effectively backfire. If that testimony is ever verified or corroborated, the initial judgment against them will not only be scrutinized, but it will force you to formulate a half-hearted apology and scramble for some feeble excuse. It will also open the floodgates for all sorts of unsubstantiated claims. Criticizing someone who comes forward with an extraordinary claim is unnecessary when you could simply ignore them or focus on other claims. While it's perfectly fine to publicly discuss those claims, weigh the possibilities, and deduce their level of probability, it serves no one to disparage those making them, unless the goal is nothing more than an attempt to elevate your status within your particular camp. When it comes to criticizing other members of the community who you may disagree with, consider listening to their point of view with an open mind, even if you think they might be completely wrong. Use that information to bolster your own ideas without actively criticizing theirs. If it turns out that individual was actually correct and does have accurate inside information that ultimately becomes verified, refraining from such personal attacks will avoid putting you on the spot later down the road. Rule number 4, avoid claiming absolute certainty. While this rule is similar to the first rule, it's a bit more nuanced and applies more so to a worldview of the phenomenon that might be built around a particular belief. Rather than making absolute claims based on incomplete evidence, make subtle claims based on probabilities. Focus on the possibility that an event could have an otherworldly interpretation without claiming that it definitely does. Doing so leaves all possible interpretations open until more evidence surfaces, without having to discard them. It also avoids egg on the face should it ultimately turn out to be a hoax. All cases should initially be viewed from a neutral perspective, unless there is clear evidence of a hoax or deception. Doing so does not suggest strict adherence to any particular claim being fabricated or otherworldly, rather leaves potentially legitimate cases open for objective scrutiny without entirely dismissing or adopting as fact. If pressed, one should say something like, "What's alleged is," or "The details of the case are as follows." Treat evidence in cases not to be proven as fact or fiction, but rather as pieces of evidence to look over, dissect, and critique, and then leave it at that. Unless there is a smoking gun of someone caught lying, hoaxing, or using CGI, then each case that displays the right amount of evidence should be looked at and graded accordingly before simply throwing it out. Always consider the other side's position on the matter. Seek out commentary and arguments provided by opposing viewpoints. Doing so will provide you with a better means of developing a counterargument if you already know there is enough evidence to at least consider the case as a valid possibility. It may also afford you the opportunity to correct any mistakes they may have made in their assessment or point out important details of the case they may have left out. Take the high road and know that you at least looked at the opposing view in full while they likely did not. Since the UFO community expects scientists and skeptics to be open-minded regarding the topic, it too should be equally open-minded with regard to their skepticism. It will also help you avoid being combative. While skeptics might sometimes provide a different view or evidence in contrast to a proponent's arguments, they can also compel us to provide a better argument or tweak our reasoning so that it is stronger and more comprehensive. It always helps to know where the other side is coming from if you expect to have any success in presenting an opposing argument. Consider searching for popular skeptical podcasts and actually listen to them. I promise this will help your argument in the long run and make you better prepared for any debate on the topic. Who really has the authority to claim they have a monopoly on the truth when it comes to the UAP topic? Does absolute confidence in that position somehow grant it empirical status? Even if a particular investigator completely disagrees with the claims of another, wouldn't it be more productive to at least consider their position rather than fostering discord? After all, no single investigator in this field is an authority on the topic. not a single one. An investigator doesn't have to necessarily accept the other's position, but there is a way to politely and productively agree to disagree. Because no matter how much someone might know about a particular case or the phenomenon in general, there is always another valid perspective. A ufologist should never claim that a given case is absolutely of non-human origin. That should not be the focus, even if it is NHI. Instead, they should simply present the evidence in a neutral manner and distribute the results to members of the general public so that they are informed enough to then interpret the evidence for themselves. Rule number 5. Remove all emotion from the equation. When interviewed or asked about the topic in general, all emotional reaction should be suspended regardless of which side of the aisle you fall. This applies to skeptics and proponents alike. Even when criticism is directed your way, avoid reacting to it in a defensive or negative manner. Take the high road. Be succinct. Stick to the facts and avoid getting emotionally charged. This will greatly assist your argument, and those viewing the exchange will lend more of a sympathetic ear. One example is how Neil deGrasse Tyson reacts to a question nearly every time he is prompted to share his opinion on the topic. By the way, I'm picking on Tyson only because he is a larger-than-life personality. He usually scoffs, makes light of it, and then presents his personal views in relation to the specific query. Simply answering the question in a straightforward manner should be his primary focus, without resorting to unnecessary wisecracks. While the exchange appears lighthearted and is likely a method of dealing with what appears to be an uncomfortable topic for Tyson, the usual reaction is an emotional distraction from the necessity of discussing the subject matter in a serious and skeptical manner. The giggle factor is nothing more than an emotional reaction that intentionally detracts from serious inquiry or scientific reasoning. We're all passionate about the topic, or else we wouldn't be making or listening to podcasts about it. If members of the community are able to express their interpretations dispassionately and focus primarily on what the evidence suggests, they will likely have an easier time being taken seriously. At the same time, it would lessen opportunities for heated disagreements among peers and colleagues, something we should consider all members of the UFO community to be. Rule number 6. Acknowledge there is no substantiated physical evidence. While many reported sightings remain unexplained or suggest an otherworldly interpretation, we must all acknowledge the fact that there is no physical proof that any of it is of non-human origin. We must strictly rely on a level of probability until more evidence surfaces. Regardless of what we think we know, or even what some might actually know, the current consensus must be based on a level of probability until more concrete evidence comes to light, whether by scientific means or based on a certain threshold of disclosure. Because even if the available evidence suggests there is a high probability of non-human involvement, yet the scientific community is unwilling to go that far, it matters not. If there is anything otherworldly behind the phenomenon, time will eventually be on the side of the ufologist. Proof will ultimately surface. The infamous quote popularized by Carl Sagan of "extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence" does not apply in the first place, provided the UFO community does not claim absolute certainty. The requirement is eliminated from the UAP topic altogether if the search for answers regarding potential non-human involvement makes no claims of scientific fact or absolute truth. If the community is able to amend its approach to the topic by merely suggesting a level of probability, or even high possibility, that should negate the proclamation of any extraordinary claim in the first place. Rule number 7. Apply the truth-seeking methods of special. See what the combined application of these methods suggests when reviewing all aspects of the phenomenon. SPECIAL is an acronym for Scientific Evidence and Reasoning, Philosophical Inquiry, evidentiary standard, chronicled accounts, invalidation or process of elimination, anecdotal evidence, and logical deduction. If ufologists habitually apply these truth-seeking methods to the phenomenon, they could be in a better position to make an argument in support of the various claims. For example, does scientific reasoning eliminate the possibility of an otherworldly interpretation, and should a current lack of physical evidence negate the importance of reviewing the evidence that does exist? Can we apply philosophical inquiry to determine if an anomalous interpretation is even sensible in the first place? Would the eyewitness testimony and available evidence stand up in a court of law if attempting to prove NHI involvement? Is there any valid historical evidence to back up some of the claims, such as documentation, videos, case files, etc.? Does an otherworldly interpretation still seem likely after logical deduction or process of elimination is applied to the available evidence? Is the anecdotal testimony compelling enough to weather any scrutiny, especially if we apply a qualitative phenomenological research design to such accounts? Special is basically a useful set of multiple truth-seeking methods applied to the phenomenon that suggests obtaining physical evidence isn't the only method of solving a mystery in the real world. While the scientific method is likely the best means of seeking a particular truth that is useful for human beings, it certainly isn't the only method. Special can also assist with determining origin likelihood. In other words, where are they from and what are their potential motives? If there is a non-human component, are they aliens from another planet or interdimensional beings from another reality altogether? Do they mean us harm or are they benign? These methods will be outlined in more detail in an upcoming episode. Rule number 8. Consistently utilize the NHI probability worksheet. This form is basically a grading system to determine a level of probability for non-human involvement based on specific positive and negative point values for each characteristic of the sighting. There are 5 levels of probability based on the total number of point values tallied for each element of observation. These levels include highly improbable, improbable, possible, probable, and highly probable. All observational aspects of a case, to include number of eyewitnesses, proximity to the sighting, accompanying evidence, possible natural phenomenon, potential mundane craft, likelihood of a hoax, and much more, will have a specific positive or negative point value applied to the overall total. If we can consistently eliminate bogus claims by immediately deducing if a case is improbable or highly improbable, we can then eliminate them from the conversation altogether. This will intrinsically omit them from any inclusion of the total number of UAP cases reported, and instead put the focus where it belongs, strictly on valid cases that rank as possible or higher. Just because anyone has the ability to file a UFO or UAP report does not mean it was a valid claim in the first place. Applying either this worksheet or the UAP video probability worksheet to each case will eliminate the need for making absolute claims for or against a particular case, eyewitness, or video. It forces us to focus exclusively on probabilities. When the episode for this worksheet airs, it will feature a rough draft of the form, a full explanation of each point of evidence, and instructions on how to apply it to any UAP case throughout history. The reason I'm considering it a rough draft is because I would like to obtain feedback from the audience in case I want to revise it before including it in the book. I want it to be comprehensive, and I'm sure many of you will have suggestions for point values I may have omitted. I will also post a printable link to it on my website once the episode airs. Same goes for the UAP video probability worksheet once that episode releases. Rule number 9. Run Bayesian statistical models. Bayesian analysis is, quote, a statistical method that uses probability statements to answer research questions about unknown parameters. It's named after English mathematician Thomas Bayes. Appropriate source is an AI-generated quote from Google's Knowledge Graph. The beauty is that anyone can develop these models provided they use the right tools. In order to do it correctly, you either need to be well versed in statistics and mathematics or make use of AI. An easier route would be to request the assistance of a mathematician or statistician to formulate whatever model you have summarized. ChatGPT or other LLMs can assist provided you have a thorough and unbiased set of priors prepared. This is the final and most thorough means of deduction based on the available information provided for each case. These models should be applied to the best cases to factor a more specific percentage value of probability. The results of the NHI probability worksheet for each case could help determine which ones are worth applying Bayesian inference. At the very least, it will help us focus on the overall question of how likely it is that we are being visited by an unknown intelligence based on the available evidence. Rule number 10. Leave all NHI origin possibilities on the table. Some lean toward an extraterrestrial interpretation behind the phenomenon, others an interdimensional one. Still others interpret the evidence as pointing to time-traveling evolved humans from the future, or look to the past for an ancient advanced intelligence that evolved prior to or alongside the appearance of hominids. All of these interpretations are presently valid, and none of them should be discounted. Regardless of what the origin likelihood worksheet might ultimately indicate, all possibilities should be left open until we know more. Since the chart provides only a basic formula for determining likelihood based on what we know thus far and is, at best, an educated guess, everyone in the community should refrain from claiming absolute certainty for or against any particular origin possibility. It is designed only to determine the best odds based on all the significant observational attributes of the phenomenon throughout history. A more thorough description of these interpretations will be provided in a later episode. While there are those who have a vested interest in a specific point of origin, whether it be because they have authored books about a particular interpretation, have put themselves out there in interviews based on that interpretation, and are inflexible with that interpretation, we must be willing to overcome the temptation to claim certainty and instead view such possibilities from a neutral perspective. There's nothing wrong with leaning toward any one of them, but when you actively fight against the others, it throws up a red flag that encourages people to view your interpretation skeptically. We must be careful not to create scenarios for unproductive disagreements with fellow members of the community by not only pushing that narrative, but also excluding any other. Again, there is too much missing information to be overly confident in adhering to any single possibility. Even if the upcoming worksheet indicates a higher likelihood of one interpretation over another, we must refrain from claiming absolute certainty. That concludes my recommendations for a first step in standardizing the approach to ufology. Rules 7 through 10 require actual forms and specific values or descriptions yet to be outlined, but those episodes and worksheets will be forthcoming. At that point, everything will start to come together. I will also request assistance from the audience in order to collaborate and promote cooperation within the community. Anything I may have left out or that you disagree with will be considered for potential revisions in the upcoming book. Following these steps also helps avoid making logical fallacies during any exchange of information. It eliminates room for straw man arguments, ad hominem attacks, special pleading, observational selection, non sequiturs, and others. Avoiding them when composing your argument will only strengthen your position. There will always be internet trolls, bullies, antagonists, and others who simply thrive on mayhem. It's okay. Let them do their thing if it gives them some level of satisfaction. Recognize it for what it is, take the high road, and focus on being a productive member of the UFO community who makes no claims of certainty nor discounts the views of others. That's all for this week's episode, everyone, and I hope you'll join me for episode 3, Science is Wrong About UAP, Part 1. Be sure to like and subscribe to help the channel grow so that I can get the message out to a broader audience. Thanks so much for your support. The following quote was made by William James in 1897. Quote, "No one of us ought to issue vetoes to the other, nor should we brandy words of abuse. We ought, on the contrary, delicately and profoundly to respect one another's mental freedom. Then only shall we bring about the intellectual republic. Then only shall we have that spirit of inner tolerance without which all our outer tolerance is soulless, and which is empiricism's glory. Then only shall we live and let live, in speculative as well as in practical things."